Hi and welcome back to sallyhughesbeauty.com. We are still in New York and I think we're in my favourite New York home that we've been in so far. Every now and then we do an in the bathroom with one of my proper true beauty heroes. I've been lucky enough to make these videos with quite a few of them now. But this person was always on my list. I just really wanted to talk to him because he is the most brilliant, creative makeup artist, and he's a Brit in New York. He's great on Instagram as well, so you must follow him. It's Mr. Dick Page. Hello.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming. I have to try and live up to that.
I know, it's all downhill from here,
Yeah,
right?
isn't it? Yeah, I can't live up to that.
I'm so chuffed to be here. I think you're such a brilliant artist. I think you've been really influential. So for those of you who aren't really nerdy about this industry and might not know Dick's background, so you've done Vogue covers, Allure magazine covers, Another magazine covers. You've worked with pretty much every big supermodel that there is, including the new crop of girls like the Hadid and kind of Phenomenon and so on, and lots of campaigns like for Versace, tons and tons of shows. How did you end up, well, firstly, how did you end up in makeup before we ask how you ended up in New York? Did you always love makeup as a kid, or was there a moment?
I don't think there was one moment. There were moments. I don't think there's one moment, but I think it's well. Of course, you know the English thing is everything's DIY. It's a small island, and when you get to a certain age, growing up through the punky thing, sort of coming of age around punk happening, it had been sort of boiling up since the 70s. So sort of remembering the glam thing, glam rock, early 70s. My older sister going through that, and then the punk thing, which is a bit more mine.
Yeah. And
then the new wave thing, which is very mine, like because then it got all blitzy, new romantic thing, yeah. Because then it was like you did everything yourself, and all the aspirations were to look fabulous.
It was all about dressing up.
It was all about dressing up on nothing, like looking amazing on nothing, which grew out of the punk ethos. Although where the punk thing was destroy, I like the huge fiction of the whole new romantic thing, like pretending you were rich.
Yeah.
Like no one should know you were going home on a night bus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So. You know, Barry
M. Were you
M,
a sort of blitz kid, or were you too young?
I was probably a bit too, just on the edge. I was probably a bit too young for that, but I was still living in Bristol, going to the clubs in Bristol, and there was like a local new romantic club that was called Raffles or something, which was kind of hilarious. But and we'd sometimes get a minivan and go over to Barry Island for whatever night. Then once in a while, Steve Strange, I think, hosted a Barry Island. He'd make a return to Wales.
Yeah,
and it was all very like Constance Carroll makeup, which was 50p, and Barry M Dazzle Dust, which, you know, went everywhere. So I like.
Oh, so now I know why your sister bought you my second book then. If
that's
your era, Constance Carroll and Barry.
Yeah, it's all that. So
Dazzle
cheap as
Dust.
chips, it stains, God knows what it was made of. And that kind of DIY thing, because I used to paint and draw all the time. That was my thing in school, was English literature and language and drama, naturally. And I did the theatre club thing and did like costumes and worked on the sets and did the makeup for that. But I'm not sure when the makeup thing actually happened, apart from I didn't train to do hair or anything, but we used to cut each other's hair and dye, everything, everyone, the whole, make your own clothes, start your own club night.
And would you wear makeup on your own face when you went clubbing?
Yeah.
So what would you do?
Oh my God, everything. Well, the eyebrows came off at one point, shaved off. They weren't sort of like sophisticated enough to bleach them. And you know, you just like model for the local hair salon.
Yeah.
So you just like guinea pig the hair salon. But at the same time, I was working in a slaughterhouse. I used to work in a slaughterhouse at the weekends. And so I'd show up for work looking like, you know, the Grim Reaper, with like the back and sides of my head shaved and top all
really
like
white skin.
Yeah, like, you know, white. I had to go out in the sun to get white. I was naturally blue, like pale blue colour. And of course that cheap makeup stained.
Yes.
So it'd have like, you know, purpley eyes because it didn't come off
You
properly.
could scrub
yeah,
and
it would never
stay
come
in there
off.
till Wednesday.
So, you know, going to school, going to clubs, working at the weekends, before and after school, milk deliveries on newspaper, on the bits and pieces. And just, I like the DIY thing, which I had to sort of circle around to, come back to appreciate that more when I got older, that's, I think, the root of what I do and what I'm interested in, which explains a bit about how I work and why I work. I really feel like it still feels ad hoc to me. Beauty is a temporary condition. I like the idea that it doesn't last for long. You don't have to be committed to anything.
No, that's the joy.
That's the thing. It just washes off, and it's a laugh. And I'm concerned is a big word as well. But it seems like everything's so bloody serious.
Yeah. So were you, I want to talk a lot more about that in a bit, but were you at this point, so you're kind of experimenting, you're loving club culture and music and everything all feels a bit exciting at this time. Are you aware at this point that being a makeup artist is a thing, is a job?
No, I wasn't. I became aware of it, I guess, in the 80s. What I thought was interesting, I mean, that was probably a retrospective realization, was that the same people, the English magazines, so ID had done its straight up thing when it was in that horizontal format, so it was very into that. And ID used to come to Bristol, go to the Dugout Club and have a night there, and you'll try and get in, you can get in. And then, but the designers, like Vivienne Westwood, when she was doing, at the end of Sex and Seditionaries and all that kind of stuff, and she was doing the pirate thing, when that happened, those clothes were in ID and in English Vogue at the time. And I thought that was really interesting, that the high-low thing, again, small island culture, everybody knows everybody else. People who couldn't get a foot in the door at Vogue were working at ID or Blitz or The Face, when The Face was starting up, those kind of things. So the cross-pollination thing was interesting. The people, a lot of people I met later on, like Ian R. Webb and Stephen Jones and Julia Fodor, Princess Julia, all those people I'd go to London and go out in places and just look at them like film stars.
I still look at Princess Julia every time
Well,
I see her. I still go up her. She looks amazing. Still,
so
always dressed up, always looks fantastic.
Film star quality, and that's something that I think there's a thread here, which might be an essay somewhere, about the thread of English glamour, which is sort of like, it's kind of jury-rigged and held together with like tape and pins, and it comes from.
It's not slick ever.
It's not slick ever. So but seeing the edges is what's interesting. So it comes from, it's Diana Dawes through Joan Collins in the early days, Joan Collins, and even what's her face from the Carry On films.
Babs.
Yeah, Barbara Windsor. And then all that, the Englishness that is not taking itself too seriously, but the aspiration.
Cobbled together.
Yeah, the aspiration to glamour is honest.
Yeah.
Which I really like.
Yeah.
I like that you can see the edges, that you can see the scaffolding sometimes.
So was there any technique at this point to what you were doing, or was it just creativity and love? You didn't really know what you were doing with your hands?
I didn't have a clue. But
so where did that kick in?
Well, because I used to paint and draw. I figured, and I was a horrible sculptor. I did some sculpture at school, which was rubbish, just complete rubbish. I mean, because this comprehensive school doesn't have the means to do proper sculpture studios or whatever. But it's it's so straightforward. Like if you can handle a certain medium, if you can draw a line, if you know how color works, and don't get me started. Like, if I think people nowadays don't have any color sense, they don't have a. I almost want to tell people to just go away and take a color theory course and come back when you know what you're talking about, because that's missing. People are so obsessed with what they perceive to be beauty technique that they don't have a background of understanding.
That kind of artistic eye.
They understand colour or light. They're sweating everyone's versions of things in magazines, but they haven't stepped foot in a museum since they were at school. Just
this is
rant,
a common.
rave,
this
rant,
is a common
rave.
thread, you see. So when we make these videos, when you talk to very creative artists, like Val Garland or Sam McKnight, or recently when I was interviewing Pat McGrath for The Guardian. These people, just as you're saying now, are always the people who are at every exhibition and constantly magpieing from films and from music and from album cover art, or whatever it is, or from mad historical books or whatever. They're constantly like pulling things out for makeup looks. They're not looking at makeup necessarily.
No, you're not, because all that's happening is, the problem with now, short attention span theatre, we touched on just casually before, was no one has any retention, and no one has any sense memory, no one has any understanding of where things probably come from. So there's an interesting thing, like a little challenge thing I've done with assistants before, more when I was training with Shiseido. I'd say, we'll take a look at a current magazine. So we'll look at an editorial by some new photographer, and then we'll look at the Martin Marcus thing that it appears to be based on. And then from there, we'll look at the Stephen Meisel thing that appears to be based on. And from the Stephen Meisel thing, we'll look at the Avedon thing that appears to be based on. And now let's go back and look at the painting, where that might have come from. Or think about the sculpture that might have inspired
Yes, and you
that.
can follow the paper trail back.
So you can, and that's kind of is useful historically. Whether you can't quantify, you can't say this one is substantially more value or an intrinsic value than the other, because the current contemporary thing is a thing that's in your face right now. But it's good to know. And I think Vivienne Westwood is amazing about that kind of stuff as well. It's like she can be a bit of a tyrant about that stuff. I got into a fight with her one time about poetry, and art, and how there was no great art in the 20th century.
What? So she was saying there was
Yeah.
no great. Okay.
You know what she's like. And I was like, fair enough. Yeah. So it wasn't like a proper fight.
Yeah.
But
No, I certainly don't agree with that.
No, but it's interesting to have a bit of range, and to be nosy. I said, like, just be curious, be nosy, look at stuff. A lot of it's free. You don't have to spend a lot of money. But if you're going to pay X for a magazine subscription, you could, get membership at if you're in New York, get the membership at the new museum.
So your influences at the beginning, I mean, you were still magpieing influences more on a sort of guerrilla level, I suppose, in clubs and music and so on. Can you remember when your first professional job was? Can you remember what that was and how it came about?
The first, like getting paid for something. I used to do weddings sometimes. I'd if I didn't have rugby practice, or if I could get off work on Saturday mornings, I'd do weddings.
Why? Because you were just a local boy who kind of could do makeup?
Yeah, I could do makeup, and I did some things for the Bristol Evening Post and Venue magazine in Bristol.
So what year are we roughly at this point?
This is probably 84,
okay.
83, 84,
okay.
Maybe, like that. And I moved to London in 87, but with these like sad little tear sheets, which I thought were kind of brilliant at the time. And they were brilliant, and they were all ripped off from other people, obviously.
Who were your makeup influences?
I was... it was people, also, of course, the people I'd seen. Like, I was obsessed with Linda Mason.
Yeah.
Loved Linda's work.
Yeah.
Linda Mason, Stefan, of course, through Peter.
So Stefan Murray.
Stefan Murray. Yeah. So Linda Mason, Stefan Murray were the people who. But then the Americans, like Sandy Lindner, who I loved from her work.
I love her. Yeah.
Kay Montana. Kay was working before I was and doing.
Was she?
Yeah. She was doing. I guess she was doing Just 17 things and stuff. Probably right before, as I was moving to London. And Jackie Lefton. And Yale was doing a bunch of stuff for ID, and there was loads of people just that you would just have a little look at. And of course, this is probably before I really had any idea about photography, so I wasn't really aware of what could be done with light and cameras. And of course, it was aeons before digital photography, but people were I was doing stuff for people and waiting for the film to come back and doing a little edit and having a look at stuff, and no one was really retouching stuff that I knew, the people I was working locally. So
I mean, when I started out, it was probably a few years later, the retouching was so labour intensive.
Yes.
It was, it wasn't an easy thing, and it was so expensive that actually it didn't exist to much of a degree because no one had the budget.
It was badly painted or dodged and burned in a black and white and scratched out. And there were a few artisanal people doing that kind of stuff, but it wasn't like the thing it is now. And if you look back at people who, if you look at like the American photographers like Scavullo at their books and the stuff they were doing, it was pretty much painted.
I really love when you see those pictures now from the 80s where retouching, I actually think they look better a lot of the time, where you see a bit more texture in the skin, where you see a bit more shadow, where things are a bit off. You might see, pencils gone a bit wonky around the lips. I actually think they look really beautiful, those pictures, and sometimes they suffer from a clean-up.
Well, that's the thing I said about seeing edges of things, like the believability of something. Even if I see something like super, super crazy glamorous, it's nice to think that person has drawn breath in their time on Earth.
Yeah, and not look like a manga anime or whatever.
And I've got a big. I did a little thing a while ago for W Magazine, and they wanted like a little sound bite for some of the story I was doing. And I just said, and it was done as a reaction to the Instagram beauty thing, which of course is very, very recent, in my time frame. Like as a dinosaur, this is like, this is right before the comet hit.
Yeah.
And I said perfection is poisonous, because this aspirational idea of beauty that you'll never attain because it doesn't exist on any level, why bother?
I'm not sure it's that pretty anyway.
It's not pretty.
It's not that aesthetically
And I'd sound like my mum, because I see these things, I think, oh, she's such a lovely looking girl. And then she put all that rubbish on her face. Do you know what I mean? All that muck on her face. She's probably lovely under there.
Yeah.
Give her face a nice wash.
So at this point, these aren't the things you're having to contend with, because everything just does look a bit handmade, because everything's so low tech and
it's low tech, and it's the glamour is active, it's mobile, it's animated.
It's a living and breathing.
It's a living and breathing thing. It's people falling apart through the night of a club or whatever they're doing, and it's the bands that you like and going to see people live. Like I remember seeing Annie Lennox when she was in the Tourists before Eurythmics.
Yeah.
And going to see them a couple of times at Colston Hall in Bristol, and just like, incredible. Because there's animation and energy and life, and I have this reaction to static beauty, which is I'm not interested. I'm not interested in frozen things. very difficult to look at or to understand.
And did you
the
have
beauty
that
of
sense then? So if we're kind of, we're approaching the mid-80s and you arrive, oh no, so it's 87 you arrive in London. So you arrive in London and you've got these kind of slightly crappy tear sheets that you know, presumably you feel pretty good about.
To have a go.
Yeah, enough to have a go. And things are starting to happen in London that are quite exciting. Do you start getting work relatively quickly? Because the pool of makeup artists was quite small in those days.
Well,
I think you could make your impact. You could have an impact with more ease than you could now.
Oh, I don't know how anyone could start nowadays.
No, so hard. So you managed to make inroads quite quickly?
Quick. Well, yeah, it probably was. I mean, it seems like a lifetime, but so I moved to London in 87, and I got a night job at Pronto Print or Bonus Print, wherever it was, in Borehamwood. So that was my night shift to pay for rent. Because I lived in Cricklewood, my horrible flat in Cricklewood, and there was a lovely bus ride up the road. And then I was shopping myself around to see people, and everybody said no, apart from Zed Agency.
I remember Zed Agency.
And Zed was famous at the time for having, you know, all the models that were cleaning up in Japan because of that cross-pollination of the English culture. That, like, you know, there's a big thing between Tokyo and London at the time, and so all these kind of slightly bizarre-looking, freckly kids who couldn't get arrested everywhere else were doing catalogue for Yoji and all this kind of stuff and all that business. And so Zed had kind of slightly wonky models, and so they took me on to do things, and I started doing like funny little record covers and stuff for smash hits and getting smuggled into Top of the Pops to do bands.
Were you the only artist there, or the rest of the girls?
There was a couple of girls there. I'm trying to remember who was there at the time. And Jerry Stafford was my booker at one point there, and there's a girl called Yiska who booked me for a little while. And it was all very, at that point it was still kind of handmade, which I think was, you know, a blessing and a curse, because I sort of had expected it to get like really glamorous, really quick. It didn't.
But you were working quite steadily.
I started to do enough, a couple of years I was doing enough that I could stop working at Pronto Print or whatever. And it was a lot of testing and meeting photographers, and then in probably end of 87 or beginning of 88, maybe 88 probably, I met Melanie Ward. Yeah. So Mel was styling, she was a Z as well. And
so Melanie Ward, for anyone watching, was just the key stylist of the sort of undone grungy period.
Just when I thought everything was going to get really glamorous, Melanie came along with her Birkenstocks and skirts.
Super talented stylist.
And so Mel is good friend to this day, and she's here now. But so at the time, so I met Mel, and through Mel I met a photographer called Paula Bullwinkle, an American photographer, and through Paula we met Corin Day, and that's where Mel and Corin started to work, and I started to work with them. And then through Mel I met David Sims, and independently of those guys, I met Jürgen Teller. I started working with Jürgen at the end of 88, well, probably mid-88, towards the end of 88, something like that. So it's almost, going on 30 years now that I used to work with Jürgen. And he was doing very different stuff then. He was shooting Polar Pan film because he couldn't afford to shoot a lot of actual film, and doing a lot of black and white stuff. He hadn't got to the on-camera flash and colour yet.
And there were disposable cameras a lot
and
as well, weren't there?
People were doing, cheap and cheerful. The Polar Pan came, I think, in either 12 or 24 frames, maybe 12 or 18, I'm not sure. Someone will correct me. And a little machine that you wound up, and if you got the picture, then you could go on to the next roll. But like one roll, maybe even half a roll per shot, depending on what you're doing. So, so I had that moment of, which of course I didn't realise until a bit later, but it was, Corin and David and Jürgen, and then Glenn Lutchford came along, and then a bit later, hi Ralph, and then a little bit later, well actually around the same time was Nigel Shaffron and Donald Christie and those people, and I'm sure there are other people who I'm forgetting. A commercial photographer, Paddy Eckersley, who I met at the time, who became a friend of mine, who was my salvation. When I got evicted for not paying the rent after said agency folded, Paddy sort of bailed me out. So it was all like fun and games, and then the 90s happened, and early 90s was the whole Calvin moment.
Right.
Suddenly.
Before we get onto that all of the photographers and stylists that you've just mentioned, so you're talking about Melanie Ward, Corin Day and David Sims and all that lot. I mean, really, you're talking about a movement. There's something that they all had in common in that there was a complete change of beauty aesthetic and fashion aesthetic. So it felt like overnight. So we'd had these kind of Teutonic Amazon supermodels with massive hair and kind of glossy lips and heavy kind of shaded eyes and all of that stuff. And suddenly we had very little makeup, very sort of modest, scruffy clothes, and girls who looked a bit scrubbed.
Yeah.
And do you think that you were influenced by them in terms of your aesthetic, or do you think that you just chimed with them because that was your vibe, that kind of very undone, natural?
It wasn't really my vibe. I think I came along thinking it was all going to be like, you know, big and glamorous and fabulous, and it wasn't. And I got it because I got along with Mel and I saw what she was doing and where she was coming from, and a lot of it was coming from her friendship with Nigel Shafran and from Donald Christie and those kind of people, and Corinne's thing at the time, you know, that whole mood was very much influenced by a wave of American photographers.
Yeah.
So even though it seemed very, very English, a lot of it was coming from Nan Goldin, the idea of Nan Goldin, Jock Sturgis, and people like that. David was very influenced by Avedon and the American West and that very sort of heavily documentary style of things. So there are all these different influences channeling in, but because of how England works, the kind of youth culture that's taken, it's a given. There's always going to be a very intense, very strong, very powerful youth culture that people pay attention to because it's always made waves. So the Youthquake thing in England was much stronger, I think, even than in America. So when punk happened, when New Wave happened, when this thing started to happen, suddenly like, it's a puffer jacket at a bus stop. Like Melanie said to me one time, she got really hysterical. She came to meet me 3 hours late, which is her normal thing, at the Amalfi on Old Compton Street. And she was like beside herself because she'd just seen an Indian lady, she lived in Gants Hill at the time, and she'd seen an Indian lady or maybe a Pakistani lady at the bus stop with like really, really bright sneakers and a sari and a puffer jacket over the top and some kind of bizarre hat, I'm not sure what it was, but that was her moment. And so she was like,
that had inspired her.
And that's all she thought
yeah.
about on the train ride in, and that was her moment. So that was going to happen, that we were going to see that very soon.
Yeah.
And so the same thing happened with the clothes, that she would find one item that suddenly spurred her on to doing this thing, and she would talk to Corinne, and then when they found Kate, and then Rosemary Ferguson, and then Sarah Murray, and that kind of like this little, and Lorraine Pascal, like we did the story with Kate and Lorraine together, which is kind of a hilarious, funny mix, the two of them, because Lorraine's 8 feet tall and Kate's 4 feet tall.
Yeah.
And you know the mix, but like for example, my glamorous idea in that was you would never know that in that story, Kate and Lorraine are both wearing false eyelashes. They're both wearing a couple of boxes of false eyelashes each, and I cut the roots off and hid them. So they have,
so they're still fluttery and soft.
They have loads of eyelashes on, but no mascara and no foundation, and no. So that became my contribution to things was stealth and kind of like how I would see and fakery. It's all fake. As soon as you point a camera at something, it's fake. As soon as you touch a brush to someone's face, it's fake.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as natural makeup.
No.
Which is great.
There's not even any such thing as natural photography.
There's not.
You know, you're not really ever catching a completely unguarded moment, because the moment there's a lens there, it's, you know.
Yeah, and then you treat it in a certain way. You decide the frame of something. Even if you print it as you shot it, you've made decisions. At some point you're making a decision. As soon as you make a decision, as soon as you open your kit, you open your box, something's happening.
And you've taken something out of context.
Yeah.
This period you're talking about was such an important period. I can't stress like how important it was in fashion history, because it was very much, it felt like a real reaction against all that stuff I was just talking about, that kind of high octane, almost superhero models.
Yeah.
Everything just looked, and I loved that period, but it was so different.
Yeah.
And it came through, and it was very, very, very pared down, and it ushered through a new wave of supermodels, Emma Balfour and Kate Moss and Rosemary Ferguson and all those girls. And you were very much at the forefront of that. And then the big thing happened, which you touched on. So you had your Calvin moment. Talk about that.
That was hilarious, because I was with, at that point, after Z had folded, I was with Debbie Waters in London. And Polly Hamilton was working with Calvin at the time, and she was styling it. And I think it was Polly who proposed to Calvin that we come in, because I think, I'm not sure who gave Kate to Calvin or proposed Kate to Calvin. And so Kate suddenly had this Calvin, and we all thought that was hysterical. Like, Kate Moss is like the new, she's the new Calvin Klein model.
She was so young and so little. And
you know. Although in real world terms, if you in a lineup, she wasn't, somehow we sort of remember her as being this minute little thing compared to all the rest of the models. And Linda's no giant. They were statuesque and photographed in such a way and treated in such a way, so like sort of, invincible superhero kind of way. And then, so I think then Polly proposed that me and Guido come and do the show. And so they called Debbie Waters, me and Guido were both with Debbie at the time, and said, about the so-and-so from Calvin Klein. And
I remember this show like it was yesterday.
And Debbie, and they said, does Dick like doing shows? And Debbie said, loves shows, does them all the time.
And you hadn't done one?
No.
So you had never keyed one, or you'd never even worked on one at all?
I never worked on one at all. I hadn't assisted anybody. I didn't know that was a job. I just about figured out that makeup was a job. I didn't know assisting was a job. There was no such thing.
So your agent goes, oh yeah, he loves the
Does them all
show,
the time.
loves the show.
Can't get enough.
So how did you prepare for that?
Well, actually, no. I'd done presentations with Stephen Jones. I'd done Stephen with Julia and a couple of other girls, and it was just, but they were like little tea shop presentations when he was on Lexington Street.
They were quite old-fashioned,
you'd go
like 1950s shows.
sit down. But it was just like a salon. It was smaller than this area, and the girls would come out. And I remember going for a swim in the YMCA with Julia in between shows. We'd go, and she'd swim like this with her head out of the water. She wouldn't get her face wet, kept her makeup on. And so Debbie arranged for me to talk to Laurie Starrett, the late Laurie Starrett, who I hadn't met at that point, and she said, you know, you should talk to Laurie because he does shows all the time. And Laurie was part of that Ellen von Unwerth guest world. I had created the Bardot Claudia Schiffer thing, so that was
and the whole Anna Nicole Smith
so
stuff,
that kind of again high octane, super glamour.
Yeah.
So I called Laurie on the landline. Remember those? And he said, "Oh well, first of all, have a cocktail."
What, before the show?
Like, have a cocktail. He said, "Now you'll have the big girls. They'll want to do themselves." And he said, you know, and of course I was thinking, who? What's he talking about? Like, this never occurred to me that the big girls would do their own makeup. I had no idea what he was talking about. So, and he sort of gave me a warning, like, well, you'll let Linda do it, and Stephanie will do this.
Linda will want her lip line.
So she'll do this. And I was like, okay, I'm making notes. And of course, it turned out that the first shows for Calvin, he was showing CK line, which is the younger, you know, diffusion line, I guess, and Calvin Collection. And the Calvin Collection show was the newish girls like Kate, but there was Lucy de la Falaise and Emma Balfour and a few other, and sort of like those in-betweeny kind of like crossover girls who had been glamorous for a second, and suddenly they were like, oh damn, someone just took their heels away.
Yeah, or had a haircut or whatever.
Yeah, they was like, have a haircut, do this.
Yeah.
Give you a haircut and put, you know.
Yeah, do your toes inwards.
Yeah, pigeon toe, just kind of do that. But then also he had Rosie Vela and Lauren Hutton and Donna Jordan and Donna Mitchell, and he brought these women back for this Calvin show, and I was like, oh, I'm so going to do Lauren Hutton's makeup. That's not going to happen. Like, but she turned out to be very nice, and she was very, very sweet to me, because I didn't know what I was doing. And we went and had the makeup and hair test. That was even better because we.
Did you have an idea when you went into the test what you might do for the show, what the look might be, or were you just thinking, I'll see the clothes and I'll work it out?
Well, I didn't know that's how it worked. I had no idea. I thought, well, they asked me for a reason. Okay. So I'll go and see. And Calvin said this, that, and the other, and Polly said this, that, and the other, and it was like, you know, we love this, and they showed us some David pictures, and we did that. Okay, that's fine. So I'll do that. So I put Vaseline on their eyelids and on the lips, and put lipstick, the one lipstick I used on the nose and cheeks.
An influential show from a beauty point of view.
If they had a little thing to cover up, I covered it up. But otherwise, and I didn't put any powder on them.
So no foundation, no powder.
Just if there was like a honking, like big zitty thing or something like that, then just that. But no cover up of the eyes.
And I think Guido put fringes back in a slide, didn't he? Wasn't it
one
that?
of those ones. It might have just been that.
Maybe it was that.
It was just that for the first one. Do that.
So tiny, tiny amounts of makeup.
Yeah, almost nothing.
And it was kind of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it was kind of, the vibe of it was that the girl might have done it herself in 2 minutes.
That was a sad curse, because that's what followed me around. That's my albatross. It was also, you know, what's the hashtag blessed? I've actually started using the hashtag cursed on my Instagram.
But that was such a moment, because makeup hadn't really been like that before.
Well,
like
no.
you shouldn't do yourself a disservice that's followed you around, because that was quite a revolutionary thing at the time.
But that's the funny thing, because you don't have any perspective on it. You have at the time, as my mum would say, it's money for old rope. You got away with that.
It felt modern, though.
It did, well, because it's how people looked, and there's a reason that you booked this person which actually still holds true for me, is like you booked this person in the first place, right, because you like how they look. Yeah. And at the test we did that, you know, we did that, and I did that, and then they would, and Calvin said, that's it, and I said, well, yeah, that's the same things in the pictures. Yeah, that's what we do. He was like, okay. And the brilliant thing about working with Calvin was he was able, because you know he didn't have that big giant business for nothing. He knew
he knew
how
to
tap
trust
into
people.
things, and if you get the people, you trust them to do the thing they do. Because the worst thing that can happen is someone gets you into a situation and then tweaks and twists and changes
I've
it.
been
And
in
then
some
what's the
absolute
point?
stinker makeup
know?
tests with brilliant artists who've just been told by a stylist that they need to do
Yeah,
it
so what
another
are you
way, and it's like,
doing?
what's the point
Why
in
am I
having
here?
this amazing person?
And you don't want to talk yourself out of a job, but it has happened sometimes where I've just said, should I just like ask them to have a shower and I can go? Cause,
Yeah.
But so he was like, that's it, and I said, that's it. And then there was, during the show itself, I remember really, Patty Hansen loved it. She was really funny at the show, and I was like, I did the thing, I was like, a bit of lipstick here and stuff, and I didn't put anything. She has freckles, and she looks amazing. And she went, great, that's fantastic. And she jumped off the table. She was happy. And everyone seemed like really fine with it. And there were a couple of girls who probably had come through this on the edge of that glamour thing, the Italian Vogue, Italian movie star looking thing, who were a little bit flipped out, who wanted their liner and their lashes and stuff like that, and they might have had a
Felt
moment.
a bit naked.
Yeah, because obviously it's
exposing.
Yeah, if you're suddenly being asked to walk out looking essentially as you did when you walked in, you haven't got any armour, you've got no protection. Suddenly, or like they're putting you in flat shoes. Like some of the girls like flip out about being put. Still happens. With of course the benefit of hindsight, which is in this business, hindsight is 2 weeks later, after people have said horrible things about you. Horrible. I mean, someone said, what's her face? Who used to write for the Evening Standard wrote something nasty about the makeup at the Calvin show. I can't remember who it was.
Larry Turner?
Larry, yeah. And I used to do stuff for the Evening Standard. I did a bunch of stories with her. We did loads of stuff together. It was quite funny. And then she just said something about, it was one of those like kind of like very tabloidy things, which I thought was kind of a cheap shot and unnecessary. You know, and of course that gave rise to the kind of heroin chic and that. And you just want to say, no one shouting about this has actually ever seen anyone on heroin, have they? You know, it's like, you could just call it, you know, like call it beer chic or like bong hit in Brockwell Park chic or something, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just, it's lazy. It's
Did
just
you
slovenly.
ever feel, I mean, that's an interesting point. Did you ever see, because this really was such an influence. It's hard, it's hard to kind of get it across to anyone who wasn't there. It was such an influential moment.
Mm-hmm.
That show, those photographers, those shoots, it really did start a new movement in fashion and fashion photography that's never really gone. You know, it's all kind of, you know, mixed in together to the melting pot now. But it's those influences are still there and can still be seen. Did you ever worry when there was the big kickoff in the press about these girls are too thin, these girls look really unhealthy, they look like they're strung out, they look like, you know, they're addicted to heroin or whatever? Did you ever have a moment and think and wince a bit about being part of it, or did you feel sure that it was a great thing?
I just thought it was normal. It was, you know, I've been, you know, I come from, like, it's like paraphrasing Chris Rock, I come from a big titty family. You've met my sister Vicky. There's big women in my family. I don't think there's been a skinny one in the line. So, but there are fat and skinny people everywhere. And it's quite normal to be a skinny teenager without any assistance. It's quite, I was probably actually was the skinny one. There were moments when people kind of romanticized the strung outedness of it, but no one seems to worry about getting fucked up down the pub, or, you know, like booze is not glamorous enough to romanticize or to get a soapbox about. So there was a couple of times when I thought, well, I've met girls who I thought were like crazily skinny, but I've also actually seen girls who were honestly anorectic. And there's a long walk between someone with anorexia and someone who's skinny. Yeah. As we all know. So I thought that was just lazy journalism for the most part.
I just found the journalism at that point, as a woman, lazy, yes. I just think there are always questions we can ask about fashion and beauty, our industry, that should be challenged constantly. There are always those questions. What my issue is, blaming the girl, which I find to be a bigger part of the problem than the questions they're asking, blaming the girl. Blaming these teenage girls for being bad role models when they're just like teenage girls, earning some money. And also slightly getting off on the pictures of thin teenage girls that you're criticising. I find the whole thing a bit gross, really.
Yeah,
It's sort of, it's that kind of anorexia porn when, no tabloid newspaper would run a story on anorexia unless they could get a picture of her looking really skinny in her pants. And so I find the concern disingenuous. I suppose that's my problem with it. It's not authentic concern.
No, it's not.
Oh my
at all.
God, look at the skinny girls.
But if it's on the front page of The Sun, and they're still running a page 3 girl, and they're saying, and then there's some editorial that says, what sort of message are we sending to our youth?
Yeah.
What, like my shirt fell off at the bus stop? That's your message?
Yeah.